name is Jessica Patterson, and I'm 23 years old. And today I'm going to share with you a story, and it's very tender to my heart. And I'm really nervous, and this is my first time speaking, so I have my notes, and I'm going to explain to you my story. I'm going to share with you a story and hopefully help you see things in a different perspective as you return back to how you each contribute to long-term health care. I have been in long-term health care professionally since I was 16 years old, and what I call how long-term care chose me since age 8. Long-term care has not just been my career, it has been my passion. And to understand why at the age of 23 I have such a passion for long-term health care, you must first start with this question. If you knew at the age of 40 you would lose the ability to talk, walk, eat, write, you wouldn't be able to walk around with your grandchildren, you would need someone to escort you down the aisle to your daughter's wedding, and life for you would end at age 60. How would that change your life? And I know what some of you are thinking. Jessica, you're 23 years old. You live in the live your life to the fullest generation. But I can tell you that is not the case for me. You see, this is my reality. Long-term care started in my life at age 8, and I remember this day like I remember the birth of my children. I remember this particular day being warm and sunny. It was a typical Oklahoma summer day. My dad had pulled into the driveway after a long day of basketball practice when he said, "Jessica, we need to talk." I knew this was serious because he didn't say Jessie, he said Jessica. And I began to think like any other 8-year-old. Maybe I forgot a chore. Perhaps the teacher said I called and said I was talking too much. Maybe we were moving and I didn't think we were getting a sibling. And some of those things are life-changing. Nothing could be more life-changing than when he explained why I had to sit on my mom's feet because they continue to move, why I had to remember everything at the doctor's office because she would forget, or why I would secretly listen to when he would give her a list as we went to the grocery store because, again, she wouldn't remember. My dad gave me the devastating news that my mother was diagnosed with Huntington's disease. I can tell you at age 8 that meant nothing, but today at age 23 that gives me the strength to get up here and tell my story. My professional story started at age 16. I was enrolled in a technology school where I was trying to finish up my high school diploma. I was in a hurry because, as we all know, teenagers know best. I had a little more motivation because not only was I 16, I was also expecting my first son. My counselor at the time knew of my story and encouraged me to enroll in long-term care program. When I asked her what it was, she simply explained it was an intro into nursing. And it was something that I was already interested in. I met my teachers and hearing them explain of what we were doing, and it all sounded great till we hit those clinicals. I'm about 6 months pregnant, smells are fierce, and I'm a teenager, so I'm just flat hat lazy. We rolled to the nursing home, off the yellow bus, and it all hit me at once. Don't look at me like I'm crazy. You all know the smell. Incontinence mixed with the brown gravy and turkey that they had for lunch. And at that moment, I decided, oh no, this ain't for me. We all got assigned to a person and away we went. I remember being in training and thinking, there's no way I will ever do this. I completed my clinicals and graduated, and that was it. I remember throwing that in the pile of algebra and all the other unnecessary tasks that I never needed. So I soon figured out after having a baby and learning my local grocery store didn't quite cut the mustard. And when you become a parent, you're going to do a lot of things you never ever desire to do. So that's when I began thinking, maybe that whole CNO thing isn't that bad after all. And I can't go to LPN school because I'm 16. So maybe I should just get my hands a little dirty until I can apply. Isn't it funny how life changes? How you have a plan, but someone else has a greater. That's right. The girl who had bets made on her on how fast Malibu Barbie would quit, or when I showed up to work and I was the only one there, and the nurse said, "You better get started because it's going to take you all day." When I first got started, I ended up on a hall. We had a normal population hall, and then in the back we had an Alzheimer's wing. Not everyone gets to start out in the Alzheimer's wing, but at the time they had a position open. I went back and I got to meet my coworker, Sheena. Sheena had been in long-term care for a long time, so I knew if I could cut it with her, I was on my way to success. When I first started with her, I was certainly frustrated. Learning why everything had to be so perfect was something at 17 I could never understand. And after a while, I became discouraged as her stiff routine became something undesirable. It wasn't until we walked into our first patient's room and I remembered looking at the patient and how frail she was. I got my patient up and brought them to the breakfast table, and I began tearing up as I fed her because at this moment it clicked. The patient gave me a vision of my own mom. I realized that I was in a place that my own mom would eventually be. Sheena at the time did not understand why I was so upset, and it wasn't until she started sharing her own story about her own mom that we clicked. She informed me that 2 weeks prior, her mom had also passed. I did transfer to other facilities due to relocating, but no place was the same as where I worked. Not the patients, co-workers, or the administrators. You see, and I worked in a place that administrators took great pleasure in investing in their employees. So my second year of working, they sent me to a conference that changed my life. I heard of stories with people with passion and why they chose long-term care as their career. Every time I would go, I would come back on fire. I wanted to further myself at the nursing home, so I went ahead and became a medication aide. I acquired my certificate, but to me, hands-on was just my thing. I loved being with my patients. I loved helping them get in the shower, feeding them meals, getting them dressed. I just loved spending time with them and hearing their stories. I even loved helping them in postmortem care, something that was undesirable by most. I loved sitting with them until they were ready to let go when sometimes their own families could not. I wiped tears from my patient's face when they simply just couldn't take it no longer. Yes, all these things were my job, but more so an honor. It wasn't until one weekend I was working the med cart that I got a call from my best friend stating I needed to get home. Her dad, Ivan, who I greatly considered a father figure in addition to my own father, was getting ready to end his journey with cancer. So that day, I rushed home to be by his side. However, I had to return back to work to finish my med pass, and then right after, I went back. I got to his side, and in around 15 minutes, he was gone. And just like that, I began to wonder, how would I ever return to long-term care? You see, in long-term care, we cope with losing our patients due to the fact they left a legacy and they have lived life to their fullest. However, in Ivan's case, I couldn't understand at age 50 how it could be true for him. The bitterness consumed my heart on why I had patients that were ready to go, but yet I was sitting with a family begging for one more day. Ivan passed on his granddaughter's first birthday, and if you knew Ivan, you would have known this was his doing because he wanted to celebrate life and not the morning of his death. And so life carried on. I returned back to work and I continued on the med cart to help by getting over the death of him. Meanwhile, things with my own mother were starting to decline. My mom was being needed more and more by my dad, and we placed her in adult daycare that was an everyday fight, and who could blame her? She already lost the ability to work, she couldn't drive, she was being harassed by my dad and I to utilize a walker, and now she was having to attend a place that she should be taking her grandchildren. The ladies there were so diligent in taking care of her. They would always be so assuring to my father that he wasn't the horrible person he believed to be. I would take her a week to my house, and he would take her a week as well, but it got to a point where she needed to be full-time. I would stop in to bathe her when she would kick home health out because she said she didn't need them. My mom was never a person to be ungrateful or unthoughtful, but this was the disease that was stealing and killing. February of 2015, my mom was admitted to a psychiatric ward for med adjustment, and here again was another decline. I remember my sons bringing her Valentine's gifts in the hospital and how I would stay with her because I knew that she might hop out of bed and I didn't want anyone else taking care of her because who could take care of your own mother like yourself? She got dismissed and all was well until she accumulated mouth sores, and then we had to think about feeding tubes. I can tell you this, that you never know what decision you might make until you have to make a life or death choice. I didn't know if we made the correct choice, but we figured this would be the time we needed to put Mom in a long-term care facility. I was completely crushed. I thought about the first patient with Sheena, and when I looked into the eyes of that person and I realized that I would be sitting there with my mom, and here we were staring at it dead in the eye. I thought about how unfair life was at 22, that I was looking for facilities for my own mom, and how other girls were out shopping with theirs, planning weddings, baby showers, attending grandchildren's things. And here I was configuring with my dad how on earth we were going to pay for it. Why me, I asked. Why me? And then it got better. I called every facility, including the one I was employed by, and every single one of them denied her due to her condition. I remember listening to the voicemails on my phone, sobbing at the top of my stairs, calling my dad with the dreaded news. My dad listened as I sobbed, and I can remember him telling me we would accomplish this, we would get through it. I was already in the process and converting over as a home health employee. My mother also went ahead and got on her services, and I remember looking at her device and seeing my mom's name type out across my screen. My mother, now a patient. How could it possibly be? I knew the fate and what was to come, but at this time I wanted to believe we were okay. I explained to my coworkers about her diagnosis, and I became fate-like. The months went by, and I figured we were okay. My dad, however, didn't cope with it as well. He wanted speech pathology to come, physical therapy, and all the works. He wanted the team to come in and fix it, and I knew better. But how to tell a man who had been with his wife for 40 years that this was it? Therapy turned her down, and soon they would begin edging in the word hospice, a word my dad would never be fond of. I remember my sister flying in, and together we celebrated what we both knew would be her last Mother's Day. I remember how it wasn't the ordinary Mother's Day with cake and tea, but just appreciating being around one another, and it all came together, that what I'd learned in long-term care was all for right here. If I hadn't learned the importance of time with Sheena and learning that just sitting there makes an impact, I would never be able to appreciate this time right now. So one night I was at my house with my 2 boys and my niece, and we all had a long day from the Oklahoma heat. We were all tucked into bed, and of course, being a mom, I was shutting down lights, wiping down counters, and my phone goes off. It's my dad, and he tells me the words in which I've told the other family members. The same words that I heard from my best friend saying, "You need to get here." I couldn't believe it. I sobbed in a panic. How could it be time? How could I have been in such denial? And I pulled up to my parents' house, and I heard this awful noise coming from the front door. It sounded almost like a pump of some sort, except for when you hear this noise, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. I searched and I ran, and I found out that the noise came from a now 90-pound-year-old woman who gave me life. I looked at my dad with his blank face, in which I knew just wanted to outpour and cry, but couldn't. I looked at my mother and how blue she was. The nurse aide in me wanted to get vitals, check her pulse, but I knew at this moment my mom didn't need me to be the nurse aide. She needed me to be her daughter. To hold her hand just like I did with many of my patients and simply just be there. The nurse came in and sectioned her out because what had happened was she was not being receptive to the feedings. The nurse told us it wouldn't be much longer. So we slept in there with my mom, and she surprised us once again. The week taking off, thinking she wouldn't be here much longer, my mom just wasn't quite ready. My dad and I slept in a room beside her every night, switching on and off on who would be on duty for every 2-hour pain meds. During the day at work, my dad would call me and say, "Okay, it's time." I would drive home, and away my mom would keep on trucking. The church would come in and sing Amazing Grace, which was her favorite song, and her eyebrows would perk, and she would continue this for 18 long days. The second week, I would take back off because I would be too tired or I would think we're too close, and it wasn't until the 17th night I looked at my dad and we talked. We were all so worn out on thinking why Mom was hanging on. I remember telling my mom how proud I was to be her daughter, such a warrior, and how I know any other daughter couldn't imagine this being the typical mother-daughter relationship, but I was completely honored. I remember telling her how I hoped to make her proud and continue her legacy, and what an honor it was able to take care of her. But it was okay to let go. And as a mother, I know that I wouldn't want to leave my kids, but right now, it was fine. I told my dad I couldn't do it anymore, that I was exhausted and becoming bitter that any other person passes quickly or peacefully, but why my mom had to suffer. I told him I was sleeping on the couch and going to work tomorrow. We all went to sleep. I woke up, made my coffee, put my scrubs on, and went into her room, and there she was, eyes closed and gone. Never to return, and then the burden began to come. How could I be so selfish to want her gone, and now I want her back? I want to brush her hair. I want to tell her it's okay, and I want her back, and nothing could ever change it. I woke my dad up, and I told him, she's gone. I remember getting him out of the recliner and looking at the woman who he loved for 40 years and dedicated his entire life to was gone. A woman in which he stated for better or for worse. I remember just sitting there on the other side of being an aide and actually being that family member. The funeral planning went and gone, and it wasn't until I had my usual lunch at a gravesite that it stuck. This is forever. This is permanent. I started to remember all the stories at the funeral of people telling me about my mom and her laughter, how she had a heart of gold, how she invested in others, and they would speak to me on how proud she was of both her daughters and grandchildren. And at first, I'd become envious of all these stories because all I could think of right now was the caregiving. But then I realized that was my purpose, to invest in her life and make sure she was properly taken care of and her last days were just as perfect as I could make them. Just like not everyone gets to be president, not everybody gets the typical daughter role. And soon I figured out that my role I received was so much more rewarding. Now then, when I mentioned my mother was diagnosed with Huntington's, I know about half of y'all instantly wondered if I had been diagnosed myself. And the answer is simply no, and here's why. When I ask you how you would change your life if you knew you were born with something that could change your life at 40 and end in death in 60, that is the question I ask myself daily. When I am helping my patients bathe, I no longer envision my mother, I envision myself. Due to the cruel nature of this neurological disease, I know I have a 50% chance of inheriting it myself. If I have it, my children get this chance as well. If I do not, then they will not either. I have a 30-year-old sister who faces the same battle and an uncle who is in his later stages. Every morning when I wake up, I look myself in the mirror at a woman whose life can change for the worse in about 15 years. So that means I love my patients a little more, I complain a little less, and yes, I do live every single day like life till it's my last, because just like my mom came across my screen, I know that I could possibly be next. Thank you.